Welcome to today's webinar entitled The Road to European Data Sovereignty, paved by iSHARE and IDSA. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Trudy de Jong, and I'm responsible for marketing for the iSHARE Foundation. iSHARE is a data sharing scheme that enables organizations to give each other access to their data. Organizations that sign up for the iSHARE scheme work with the same identification, authentication, and authorization methods. The big advantage of this is that they do not need to keep making new agreements every time they want to share data. iSHARE is an initiative of the Dutch logistics top sector aimed at stimulating data sharing in logistics. I'm delighted and really proud to co-host and moderate this webinar with the International Data Spaces Association, an international network where business and research are actively involved in designing a trustworthy architecture for the data economy. IDSA aims to facilitate the worldwide exchange of data between data providers and data users in business ecosystems. And they do that in such a way that data providers always stay in control of their data. I'd like to say a special thanks to the Dutch logistics top sector for making this webinar possible. We are so excited to see so many of you joining the conversation today. Data sovereignty is gaining momentum both locally and internationally. We will kick off this webinar with a presentation by Lars Nagel, who is the CEO of the International Data Spaces Association. That will be followed by a presentation by Gerard van der Hoeven, who is the director of the iSHARE Foundation. Before handing over to Lars and Gerard, I would just like to quickly mention a couple of things regarding housekeeping. This webinar will last for approximately 1 hour, and during the presentations you can ask questions at any time, and you do so by typing your questions in the webinar Q&A application. Please, if you have a question, mention the name of the speaker you would like to address your question to. Lars and Gerard will answer as many questions as they can during this broadcast. After this webinar, the recording of this webinar will be published immediately. So let's kick off with the presentation by Lars Nagel, CEO of IDSA. Lars, it's over to you.
Thanks a lot, Trudy, for the very kind introduction. And I'm very happy to have you all in the call, attending this webinar, and I'm really looking forward to share our thoughts on, well, the idea how to realize the data strategy of the European Commission and some ideas what to do next jointly with our partners from iSHARE. And I'm really looking forward to the question and answer session afterwards. So, hello everyone. Well, obviously we want to talk, and we should talk about data, and that is at the core of what we're talking. So obviously every company has data treasures in their company, and well, we have to create value out of it. So that means linking data, sharing data without regret, and staying in control over the flow of your data while creating jointly value in ecosystems. So that is what it's all about. And this is written down in the first, in the European Strategy for Data, which has been released from the European Commission in February, and well, which transports all the ideas which we discussed already throughout the last years. And it has been summed up in a strategy focusing on data sharing in joint value creation and data sharing ecosystems. And therefore, we have to obviously talk about the flow of data across sectors based on the FAIR principles, which are probably familiar to everyone. And we have to talk about access, management, and use of data, because if we assume that data is a treasure, that data is an economic value, well, then we have to find a mode of action how to deal with this asset as we have it in place for all other assets, which are real and tangible and can be grabbed with our hands. But with data, it's different. And so we have to come up with a different approach how to deal with this special kind of economic asset. The European Commission describes in the strategy for data the idea of creating a European data space, which is obviously a very good idea because such an European data space in general enlarges the availability of data. Making as many data endpoints as possible available for any activity, so creating insights in AI or just creating value in any sector. Probably we should set up an infrastructure to use and exchange data. It is written in the strategy, and we have to come up with appropriate governance mechanisms. So I think we can bring something to the table concerning this issue. Furthermore, the Commission proposes to focus on 9 dedicated data spaces in key sectors. It's described in the strategy for data. So manufacturing, Green Deal, mobility, health, finance, energy, agriculture, public administration, and skills. And so that is something to talk about separately. Okay, but well, how can we realize the European strategy for data? So what are building blocks? What are design principles that can help really making the best out of this idea? Okay, probably we need a common design principle for data spaces so that all of this works according to the same mode of action, so that we can really have benefits and a lot of synergies between all these sectors and all these data spaces. The International Data Spaces Association, which is on the market for 5 years now, we are a not-for-profit organization. We have developed, together with a lot of companies and research organizations all over Europe and even globally, an open reference architecture which sets and proposes framework conditions for data spaces, well, as you can derive from our name. And this is in itself based on open standards. So we are referring to other things which are already out there. We make a suggestion for a trust framework and a scheme for data sharing and integrate other approaches. And obviously, when it comes to infrastructure, we have to coordinate data sovereignty services to really deliver the value proposition on data sovereignty. And with this in place, we will have really open distributed data ecosystems and marketplaces and all other kinds of data ecosystems. We can really ensure data sovereignty for the creator, for the originator of data. We can prove data provenance in end-to-end data supply chains, audit proof if necessary, and definitely based on European values. Well, that is what we're all talking about. So let's talk about these common design principles. Here you can see the view of the world seen from the Commission. So we have the dedicated sectors, industry sectors are on the top. So they want to share data, and we need obviously to bring all the architecture layers in place, which you can see below. So we have to talk about networks and devices. So that's the 5G debate. We have to come up with an appropriate, perhaps even European-based cloud and edge infrastructure. For example, Gaia X is a project which is on this layer. Then we have to talk about the data sharing infrastructure. So the things which we drive at IDS, and then all the market-specific solutions can appear and really create value. So that is what we want to come up with in Europe when we are talking about a digital single market. And obviously in the center, we have to talk about data spaces. Well, we could see data spaces as clean rooms for a prospering data economy. So the place where you can be sure that only this happens to your data, what you want to happen with your data. So you can stay in control and you can combine data sets, you can manipulate data sets, you can add applications, algorithms to data sets, which you match, link, or share with the other partners of your ecosystem. And all this happens in a data space. So this is the place where everything happens, where the whole value creation takes place. And so we have to really talk about, okay, how does it work? So in the medieval age, you have a marketplace, so everyone knows, okay, you have to go there, there are some rules, and if you want to sell a pig and you want to get flowers, then you know how the governance is about that. And we have to come up with something for this when we're talking about the data spaces, as it is mentioned in the strategy for data. So, okay, what is a data space? So we all know what a marketplace is. So there are some houses and a free space in the middle, and everyone can bring the goods there, and then you can buy something. So what's like this with data spaces? Well, here you can see a picture of, well, one out of thousands of data spaces. So you see that a data space consists of a lot of very, very different data endpoints, which are combined or linked through any protocol or data exchange mechanism. And you can see that there are machines linked with IoT platforms, with marketplaces, with enterprise clouds, and even open data sources. And this is a data space. And there are thousands out there in different domains, small ones, large ones, some where there's only club goods shared between companies. So it needs not always be open. It can be a closed shop, but it can also be very open and targeting a whole industry sector. And the design principle for all of this should be the same, so that you can easily connect your data endpoint to any other data space which is out there, and that enlarges the possibility of value creation for any company. So, and well, linking this to the European strategy for data, well, you can see that we obviously can use the same design principle for any industry sector, and then these industry sectors will really or can really benefit from cross-sectoral data sharing. We will enlarge the data pool which is available, and we will no longer have silos where the value is buried in the basement and no one can make use of it. So let's think about this. We suggest some design principles for data spaces in the reference architecture of IDSA, ensuring data sovereignty. So what we really have to talk about and what we can bring to the table for any data space, for any company or any ecosystem, any OEM and supplier combination, any domain, everyone who wants to set up a data space, you have to tackle these three issues. So we have to talk about connectivity. So can we really integrate every data endpoint into this data space, and how does it work, and how can we make sure that everyone understands which kind of data set I provision there? Then we have to talk about trust, because as you can see from the green picture before, we are, when talking about data spaces, we are talking mostly about different security domains. So we are no longer bound to one platform where there's a focal company in control over everything, but we have to combine all these platforms. And this is the idea of data space. We have to really focus on trust, how to ensure and safeguard trust between different security domains. And then, as mentioned, we have to come up with a governance for the data economy. So how can we well describe usage constraints, and how can we enforce usage control at the end, also technically. So we obviously have to think about an information model, how to describe data, metadata. When it comes to trust, we should think about certification schemes. And when it comes to usage control, there are concepts of usage control out there, and our systems, our IT infrastructures, they have to be capable to really enforce these concepts of usage control. And not all of these systems are capable to do so today. So our idea would be to come up with a common design principle for data spaces, which makes life easy for every data space which will be created in the future. And so this envisages the three value propositions I mentioned. And here we amended also the idea of building blocks for data spaces, which should be, well, like checked when setting up a data space, when setting up a project or whatever data sharing scenario you are going to create. And when talking about, well, connectivity or enlarging the pool of data sets, then we have to talk about standards, metadata description, and data exchange in general, so protocol, security, and so on. In the middle part, when we talk about trust, then we have to talk about identification, authentication, authorization, certification, and monitoring. And when talking about governance, well, we have to talk about all the agreements which have to be made between all the participants in a data space. So legal agreements, operational agreements, earning models. So data is an asset, how to earn money with it, certification, monitoring, and some specific ideas on governance, for example, usage control. And as you can see here, this will be probably, this is a bit different. So there are some very generic design principles. So this is most of this is described in the reference architecture from IDSA. So this is generic. It holds true for every data space that we want to create. And then there are some domain-specific agreements and building blocks and design principles, which may be different from domain to domain. And then there may be even some business case specific issues. And well, there's a lot out there how to move on with this and how to realize the design principles. And this is our strong collaboration with iSHARE. You can see the red marked boxes. So these are issues where, for example, iSHARE can help and can even help speeding up the evolution of data spaces. So that is what Gerard will present later on. And so our idea is to bring this to European data spaces, or to the European data space, to all the data spaces mentioned there. And I would please ask you to have a look at the Open Day project. So this is trying to bring all the data spaces in the context of digitizing European industry. So the large strategic approach. Links 26 projects on European level, so a lot of companies will be involved, and this can be a very interesting project and source for knowledge when setting up use cases. Here, so what can you do? What can you do when setting up a use case? Well, first of all, you should think of how to provision your data set, how to describe your data, and where to manipulate data, and where to name the usage constraints for your data. And this is like a secure internet gateway, the IDS connector, and this is probably a very good starting point when setting up the data space, which consists of a lot of endpoints, and in the idea of a peer-to-peer network, everyone can provide data in its own connector, and then you have a network of data sets, of data endpoints, and then you have a data space. So there's also a formal standardization on it, which you can refer to the DIN specification 27070. The IDS Association is driving all of this, and in a consensus-based process, we create every year a new version of the reference architecture model, which is the foundation of these design principles for data spaces. Well, more than 100 companies and research organizations in 20 countries have been working on this and created this during the last 5 years. And there's a lot already been done. So there is a lot to find on the internet where these IDS concepts are already implemented and which are proven to work, so that you can use it in your data sharing scenario when creating your data space. So you see here all the roles which are necessary when talking about the data space: data provider, consumer, and some services in between. And as you can see here, a lot of companies already provide implementations and products and services which are already built according to these design principles, and we think that we should go on with this according to the strategy for data from the Commission, because I think all share the insight that data sharing is better than playing alone, and that should be my message for today. Let's think about how to make data spaces really happen. We have some design principles and building blocks presented here. Gerard will detail this a lot more, and then let's discuss in our question and answer session.
Before we move on to the next presentation, Lars, there is thank you, Lars, by the way, for setting the scene for the presentation. There is a question from the audience, and I'd like to present it to you. Someone is asking, where does the logistics sector or the supply chain fit into the 9 data spaces of the European Data Space Association? He refers to slide number 2. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, well, the logistics sector is probably, well, at least when I'm thinking of it, the first sector when thinking about data sharing, because, well, per definition, logistics or supply chain management is the sector where companies work together and exchange, well, goods, transport goods, and therefore data sharing is thought in the logistics domain from the very beginning, so for decades. And so from our experience, so there are a lot of data sharing scenarios which are most mature, which come from the logistics domain. So why is it not part of the 9 data spaces mentioned from the Commission? Well, we should ask the Commission why it is like this. Probably it is a part of or it is seen as part of the manufacturing domain. So that is my experience, and we have to see that logistics and supply chain management data sharing scenarios are part of the manufacturing data space. And yeah.
Thank you very much. Do you want to take another question? Someone from the audience is asking, are there any alternative building blocks for iSHARE in the IDS architecture? So, or is iSHARE the only option for authorization and authentication?
No. So thank you for that question. So nothing which I presented is exclusive. So the reference architecture model presented by IDSA, it is it is a reference model. It is technology agnostic. And so, and as I mentioned, it refers in itself to a lot of standards and policy rules which are already out there. So it mainly combines everything what we know about data sharing and cybersecurity and semantics of data sharing and all these issues to one model. And that is what we did the last years to really prove that this works and this receives acceptance from companies. And that is what we discussed with our members, and we are very happy to invite other companies to join our association and to discuss what has to be added to this. So this is an open standard. Our reference architecture model is open. It's referring to other standards, and we team up with initiatives which have very good ideas how to do it. And this is the case with iSHARE. So there are other ideas and other approaches to talk about identity and access management, authorization, identification, and so on, than iSHARE. But what they did is really good and convenient, and it is one out of many. So you are free to use something else. But this has to be, well, this proved to be obviously a success.
Yes, so if I understand it well, there are more alternatives, but iShare is the one that is operational at this moment and proven. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely that. And yeah, so there are, so when talking about these issues, you can solve the issue of identification, authorization, authentication in a lot of different ways, but you always have to team up with a group when talking about data sharing, and therefore you have to agree on something. And well, iShare is probably a very, very good way to do it, because they thought the whole idea through and present a whole concept which is convenient and ready to use. And I think when listening to Gerard, you can see that this is really a very good idea to use.
Okay, thank you very much, Lars. Well, let's move on with the presentation from Gerard. Gerard, it's up. Take the floor.
Thank you very much, Trudy, and thanks a lot, Lars. And thanks for taking, well, pointing out a few of the key items with regards to iShare, where we play. iShare, as Trudy started in the introduction, is indeed started in the logistics space as an idea we should collaborate a lot more, totally in line with the European data sharing plans that are there now. But one of the key things that was missing in really working together and sharing information, and with that building of new sharing structures, build more efficient logistics. One thing that was missing in all of that was trust. The trust to really collaborate together, to share information, knowing that that information is not going anywhere else other than for the purpose of that sharing and making and creating a better collaboration. So iShare is really created to create a trust framework for data sharing really early on, but since it started so really early on, it's now, and thanks for saying that, Lars, it's proven and it's there already. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share some of that with you today. So iShare, as also in the picture of Lars earlier on, it's basically a combination of agreements on the agreement side, so both legally and operationally. How do we work with data? How do we exchange data? And what are you allowed to do with that information? That creates the first layer of trust. Then the second part is the identification and authorization. So who is on the other side? What company is on the other side? And what is that person of that company allowed to do with my information? And by creating that structure, we created a layer that is basically the foundation of collaboration and data sharing. So that's where it's a total fit to, as Lars mentioned, or the data spaces where you want to collaborate in. You need that foundation to make sure that that is done in a decent way, and that all is governed by a non-for-profit again. So the iSHARE Foundation is managing the trust level of basically that trust framework that iSHARE is. So iSHARE has been built on a few guiding principles, and also, as Lars already mentioned, it's a generic building block. So we don't want to be specific for a specific segment, because we saw that, well, logistics is touching everything. So in the end, you should be open to be able to collaborate with others by the use of open standards and by the use of open technology. And second to that, it's federated. So we're not only open from a technology perspective, but we also collaborate and are open to collaborate with other trust frameworks that are out there in the market. So we limited the scope. It's really only about identification, authentication, and authorization. And we use what's already there. And obviously, jump to the last point. iSHARE is internationally focused. Logistics is international by default, so it's really based on international collaboration standards. So with that, we use standard technology that's already on the market, but then designed in a way that the technology falls under the legal and operational agreement umbrella and builds up a real collaboration environment. And one thing that is really important to point out in all of that, same as with the IDS structures, iSHARE is not a platform. We're not in between data sharing. We harmonize how you collaborate. So we harmonize how you work with identities. We harmonize how you collaborate with others without defining what the exact data is. So the data part is still something that is open to any use case. But we built that trust layer, that harmonized trust layer that allows you to collaborate with others in a smooth way. And with that, we support, well, obviously communication and sharing of information, both for machine to machine, but also for human to machine. And that is important. I'll jump to that a bit later on. That's important for the logistics especially, but also for others, where we see that machine-to-machine data sharing is maybe a bridge too far in some of the use cases, and where human-to-machine access to portals and with that sharing information would be a great first step. So that's when it comes to the interaction side. So next is we facilitate flexible authorizations. So authorizing who can access your information and also allow others to use your information to a certain extent. That part is facilitated in also the authorization register. And then the identities are a key item of the iSHARE structure. And both of those facilities are federated as well. So we work with authorization registers, which are suppliers of an authorization register service. And we work with identity providers of trusted identities that follow the scheme, that are on eIDAS level, and assure that the people that are working within the trust framework are trusted and are who they say they are. Then last two items is the delegation. So some of the use cases we've seen, it's about delegating the right to, say, pick up a container, which is something we also have built into the scheme, which is not something specific for logistics, but is usable for many other cases. And in the end, it's all about the user to control. to control this data. It's data sovereignty in the end. So you control if you share information, what the right is of people and companies and platforms that you share your data with. There's a lot of industry support. That's what this slide is about. But the key thing is that iSHARE is not built as an independent idea, but it's really co-created with the industry. Different areas of logistics, both marine, road, and air logistics are and have been involved in the development of the standard and the scheme. And it's not surprising on this slide, there are also the first movers that are actually using iSHARE on a day-to-day basis. So let me dive into that right after explaining a bit more on where iSHARE and IDS link up. Because as you've seen in that in the slide of Lars, there's a great fit how well, iSHARE developed the building blocks that are in Lars's slide, but all the way down to implementing and realizing it. So it's really the first step if you also want to go the IDS direction and want to use IDS, the IDS architecture. It's a total fit to start using iSHARE as a first step. And we announced that earlier this year, where we shared a collaboration memo with the world, where we agreed to really collaborate together, because IDS and iSHARE are basically fighting the same fight. There's so much inefficiency in segments. There's so much hidden gold. I really liked your starting slide, Lars. In many companies and many verticals where it's just hidden. So let's work together on that. And that's how Lars and I shook hands earlier this year and to really start working together on that. And where IDS is really those first two steps, is covering some of the first two steps in moving into IDS, and totally embedded into the entire IDS architecture. But then connected to the data or the information provider and the data consumer, the service consumer and the identity provider, as is in the architecture. So the main question I got asked since I started being responsible for the iSHARE Foundation is where to start. Can we really do something like practical? Well, obviously it all starts with becoming a part of the scheme, falling under the scheme and being an active participant and being a part of that network of trust. So really start to collaborate with others to make sure that you can know who's on the other side, authenticate and authorize other parties, and fall under the agreements, the same terms of use of that information, which allows you to collaborate with everybody else under the same scheme. And that's the great part of the scheme as it's set today. So as pointed out, that all creates that network of trust. But then the question is, again, what do you do first? What's the first step to start moving and collaborating? So one thing I wanted to show, and I'll move forward through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to share one of the key use cases that we see happening quite a lot now, because the first area where we see the potential of data sharing models is between applications, between platforms, between tools that are already used by many of you on a daily basis. But all those platforms use their own identities, use their own access mechanism, and with that create their own silos again. So even further away from having a silo within a vertical or within a segment, even within every application, there is a silo created, because there is no harmonized way of identities, and there's no harmonized way of the terms of use of that information. So across those platforms, it's totally impossible to to make links of different data sources and different elements. That's one thing we saw that was happening in especially the logistics, but is also happening in many other segments. So what is happening, a trucker or a truck owner or transporter or someone who owns goods is logging in on a daily basis on all those platforms separately, sharing accounts with others, and with that, well, harming the level of security of the industry, harming the level of trust of the platforms as well. So we saw that, and I saw so many of the participants under the iSHARE scheme, where we came to the conclusion, let's start to use iSHARE as a login mechanism, as a starting point, where there's a harmonized identity. And with that harmonized structure, you can start sharing your information that you share on those portals. And as a next step, start sharing data in more advanced ways, like connecting APIs. But this is really the starting point. So practically, how we do that, it's basically working in a similar manner as, well, a payment methodology. Like, say you have, well, Ideal in the Netherlands, or maybe you have multiple PayPal accounts. If you click on PayPal, and you have all the options to select the right account. So that's the way single sign-on with iShare also works. You click on the iShare button, you get the view of the different identity providers. You select your identity provider, and you log in a harmonized way and a secure way into the platform you're going to use. And with that, we create the opportunity to break the silos and collaborate across those different platforms. And with that, we make the entire process of creating users and managing identities for portals or for apps or for different applications void. Basically, it's you don't need the entire process of checking passports, checking applications, checking who is on the other side, like physical validation. That is all done by identity providers that fall under the trust framework of iShare. And since it's governed by iShare, we assure and monitor on a constant basis whether the identity providers and all the participants in the scheme keep to the rules and keep to the way we agreed to collaborate together. So that idea and that plan is not an idea, and it's not a plan only. It's in reality. So currently it's already used in the Port of Rotterdam by Hudson Port. ECT is a terminal that is processing a lot of goods on a yearly basis, and a lot of truckers come by and provide their services to ECT by picking up containers, bringing goods, and also sharing a lot of information. Obviously, data sharing is a key thing there. So ECT adopted iShare and is now live with iShare as a single sign-on. First on their app, soon also on their portal, and we currently have a list of companies that are also taking this into account and into their roadmap to start using iShare in a similar way. Because what this means is that from the first step that ECT put this live, 5,000 of their truckers that visit them on a daily basis, that are from hundreds of different companies, could log in on a secure and harmonized way in a similar structure. And
may I, sorry to interrupt you, but we have a question from the audience concerning single sign-on. Someone is asking, does iShare single sign-on mean that iShare is an identity broker?
So that is a good question. So indeed, a part of the scheme is the identity broker function that is allowing you to select the identity that is that you have with that login procedure, and through the use of the standards, it allows you to use multiple identity providers. So a lower level function is indeed the identity broker, and also an authorization broker. That is, those are the two features that are available under the hood. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Gerard. I think that it's a perfect answer to your question.
Cool. It's indeed a great question. So it's not iSHARE providing identities; it's independent identity providers that fall under the iSHARE scheme and under the principles how we secure identities in the process. So examples, well, in this case, we show Secure Logistics, which is a identity provider for years, have currently 45,000 users with identities that can log in through iSHARE. So already 45,000 users are available. And with that 45,000 users, you see that there's that optimization, because those 45,000 users log into, well, let's say 50 platforms already. So they are all getting used to the way to log on to portals like that. So advantages of that, in the end, I jump down to the last point. It's all about the data sovereignty again. So it's really the first step in making sure that you control your information, the information that you share if you log on to any platform. But it's it has an optimization for the entire organization on, say, the portal and the app side already, because it's lower management costs, it's higher productivity, it has higher reliability. You don't have to manage all that within your organization, so it totally simplifies how you work with users. But with that, the key point of this call, of course, it's that harmonization of who is sharing what information within the application or within the platform, because that is the first step to start to do also transactions and collaborations across platforms and across verticals, in line with the data spaces that Lars explained. It starts with harmonizing that, and well, and like we said, iSHARE was already moving forward on that. So this is not a theory or a great idea. It's there already. So we help with our adoption team and with our implementation partners. We help companies to start adopting the secure way of accessing their applications. So the way to start using it is, well, join iSHARE, join the scheme, which is a great start to start being a user of the IDS architecture, and then start updating your application, your front end, to allow iSHARE login as well, and then start on the journey to start sharing information of that same user base across different segments, different applications, and different verticals, because that's where the real goal is. But this is really the first step, which is taking away a lot of the pain already. So if you may ask, what should I do now? It's starting, well, the first starting point is start using and start signing the iSHARE agreements, which is a lot lighter than if you sign up for any Google or Dropbox service, but assuring your data is safe, and with that, make the first step into the IDS architecture. And let's move together on that. Let's start building, well, a data economy in this structure, and assure that we make it secure, and make sure that we keep owning that data, that we are working towards, well, the European data sovereignty. A bit more information on that is on the iSHARE website, which we probably share later on, Trudy, I would assume. iShareWorks.org is easy to find.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Gerard, for sharing your views on how data sovereignty works out on a really pragmatical level. and how with iShare you can make your first step into the IDS architecture and into data sovereignty, and what the advantages are. So thank you for that. Gerard and Lars are now taking questions from the audience. I have already a couple of questions from people. So the first one is someone wants to know if he or she would like to start using iShare, would you then automatically become a member of IDS as well? Gerard or Lars, maybe one of you can take that question.
So we haven't harmonized that membership structure totally today. iShare is a foundation, and also IDS is a foundation. We have the same models when it comes to, say, the membership fees, but iShare is well, like 1/3 of the IDS level. So it's basically a small addition compared to IDS. I'm not saying that IDS is expensive, Lars. That is obviously for you, but we're harmonized in a way of pricing structure, and it's not that iShare is charging like anything to the amount of use or anything. It's also based on revenue level, and it's well, it starts with like 750 per year if you're over 5 million in revenue on a yearly basis. So it's really low level. Our key objective is to get as much well, organizations on board under the scheme and under the umbrella, and keep that barrier as low as possible.
Just thank you, Gerard. If I understand it correctly, IDSA and iShare are taking their collaboration step by step to the next level, and some stuff still needs to be worked out. And a question from the audience is, one of the questions is, how will the collaboration look like in future? Have you already some thoughts on that? Will you start sharing resources? Will you start doing shared promotion? Or is there anything else that you are thinking of?
Well, shared promotion is already happening. That's what we're doing today. So that's for sure. And since iShare is a trust scheme, and well, we're still finding ways to expand that and see whether we need other trust schemes as well and collaborate with that. But I think the key thing is that it's a building block that is under the same principles and the same architecture as IDS is promoting and has designed with the entire team that is behind IDS. As Lars earlier said, it's not a technology; it's a standard that we're complying to, and iShare has implemented one part of that standard, and with that is a great fit. Lars, maybe over to you. What can you extend or react on that as well?
Yeah, so I would really like to answer on this. So so in general, as you can derive from the picture with the design principles for data spaces, so we are targeting something. Well, so we are working on different levels. So IDS is going to set up a global standard, an open standard for everything. I showed all the design principles, and so as mentioned, we are talking about things that are common and which are technology agnostic, and iShare is one step closer to implementation and to use for companies, for markets, for domains and industry sectors, and at the end data spaces. So what we're doing, so if you are thinking about joining one or the other organization, well, these are completely different ideas. So if you want to do something operational, if you want to use something for your business processes, well, when it comes to identification, authentication, authorization, then you have to join iSHARE, and that is something where you can really have a benefit in your operational processes. From IDS, we are working on a standard, so we are a standard developing organization. If you're interested in working together with us on this standard, on the reference architecture and on the design principles, then you should join the IDSA. We are working very closely together to see if the reference part, the technology agnostic part, fits to the concrete realization or implementation by iSHARE, because when we define the reference architecture, we have to see that it works at the end. So we are in a continuous discussion with companies, and therefore the iSHARE Foundation with a lot of users and members is very valuable for us, so that we can retrieve requirements, what is needed in the future. So we have a very close alignment when it comes to further writing the reference architecture. So in every next generation of the reference architecture model, we will include new things, and we have a lot of liaisons up and running. So we have formal liaisons with a lot of initiatives, like Industrial Internet Consortium, with the Japanese initiatives, Industrial Value Chain Initiative, on technical level with the OPC Foundation, when it comes to implementation and open source framework with the Fireware Foundation, the Platform Industry 4.0 when it comes to manufacturing, the Big Data Value Association on European level, and so on and so on. And what we want to know each time is, what are requirements from these domains, what are technologies used, and what can we put on the reference level, which can hold true and may be shared with other domains and industry sectors, so that it can hold the design principle for data spaces in general.
Well, thank you very much, Lars, for your comments. I'm afraid that we are running out of time, and I'm afraid also that we are unable to answer all of the questions in the chat box. So I suggest we take these questions offline and answer that separately. I would like to thank you and Gerard for presenting and for answering the questions. And of course, thank you to everyone in the audience for participating. Keep an eye on our websites for the latest developments about iSHARE and IDSA. They provide useful details. And if you're interested in taking the first step into the IDS architecture with iSHARE, please get in touch with us. We can expect to see a lot happening over the coming months, so stay tuned. I hope to see you again for our next webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and goodbye, and see you soon.
Bye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.